Hi there, my name is Garrett and I'm making a video for Brandon Campbell about peaking for powerlifting. He asked that I do this after I totaled 1873, setting the unofficial US record in the 242-pound class at a local meet in the USAPL Federation. This was after totaling only 1719 at USAPL Raw Nationals and placing 6th. There were a number of factors that contributed to my poor performance at Nationals, but one of them was not having proper meet preparation so that I peaked at the right time. And after you've put all that work into your training, you definitely want it to show up on the platform. So, when I talk about peaking, I'm talking about being at your best on a certain day. And this involves 3 factors. First, fatigue is the energy debt that you incur from training volume. As volume goes up, your fatigue goes up. The more you lift, the more tired and sore you become. Next is fitness. Fitness is the ability to perform a sport-specific task. So when I say fitness, I don't mean general fitness like low body fat or aerobic ability or endurance. Fitness for powerlifting is your ability to lift in the squat, bench, and deadlift with maximal strength. And also preparedness, which is how ready you are to display your fitness at any given point. All 3 of these are important factors in peaking. Let me explain. Fatigue has to go down for preparedness to go up. You're not prepared to show your fitness if you have a lot of fatigue. If you're really sore and beat up, you're not going to lift maximally. Likewise, fitness is maintained when you're working out. If you're doing squat, benches, and deadlifts, then you're going to have a higher proficiency at squat, bench, and deadlift than if you weren't doing them or if you stopped doing them. Anybody that's lifted for a period of time and then gone away from it knows this. When they come back in, then they're not doing as well. This is also seen in sports like golf, where if they don't practice their golf swing, even though they've done it thousands and thousands of times, they lose that ability. They lose their fitness for their sport. Now the question becomes, how can you reduce fatigue and therefore increase preparedness while still keeping fitness high and having that show up when you go to the competition? Well, here's how it can be done. About 2 weeks out from your powerlifting meet, you do 4x3 on all of your lifts. Let's say, for example, my training cycle, and I'll put an Excel sheet in here with kind of a mock-up of what this might look like for you. I did 4 sets of 3 of squats on Monday, 4 sets of 3 of bench press on Wednesday, and 4 sets of 3 of deadlift on Friday. I also then did a drop set where I dropped it about 15% and did another 4 sets of 3 for a total of 8 sets of 3 over the day. This was a large amount of volume because I was doing those sets of 3 with 90% and then dropping it down to about 75%. And so this was an extremely tough day with a lot of volume at a very high intensity. This made my fatigue very high, but that also kept my fitness very high as I was preparing myself for my sport. The next week, I cut the volume almost exactly in half. And I did 2 sets of 3 instead of the 4, 2 sets of 3 with squat, bench, and deadlift on their respective days, and then a drop set of about 15% for another 2 sets of 3. So I had a total of 4 sets of 3 working sets each day. I increased the intensity slightly to 92 or 93%. And so these were where I set rep PRs, 3 rep max PRs. So the intensity is slightly higher, but the volume is half of what it was the day before, or almost half, or the week before rather, not the day before. What this means is, even though I was lifting heavier weight, my fatigue dropped, because the biggest contributing factor to fatigue is training volume. And so if you cut training volume, your fatigue is going to drop. However, since your intensity is still high and you're doing the 3 basic movements, squat, bench, and deadlift, your fitness stays high even while your fatigue is dropping. As your fatigue drops, your preparedness increases. The last week, I dropped to 50%, cut the intensity almost in half, and did 3 sets of 3 on the squat, bench, and deadlift on Tuesday and Thursday, and then had the meet Saturday. So I worked squat, bench, deadlift, 3 sets of 3 with 50% of my 1 rep max on Tuesday and Thursday. The reason I did this was because in the powerlifting meet, I'm going to be doing the squat, bench, and deadlift. I'm going to do 3 attempts. And so I was training the movement patterns, though I cut the intensity so that I could have my fatigue drop even more, so that I was the most prepared and recovered as possible for my powerlifting meet, while still keeping my fitness high because I was working the motor pattern. At this point in this last week, you're really recovering. You're not building anymore. All of the building and the incurring of the fatigue debt has already happened way back in your training cycle. If this whiteboard was longer, we could put up 12 weeks of training and you would incur that fatigue debt over that time. The purpose of peaking is to go into this overreaching phase where you have an extremely difficult workout with a lot of volume at a high intensity, followed by a low volume and even higher intensity day, followed by a deload week that lets you recover as you go into your competition. Now, this was what I used as a 242-pound lifter who has a fairly high degree of proficiency in the sport, and I have an elite total. This is why I have an entire week devoted to a deload. However, if you're a smaller lifter with a lower total, you may not need an entire week to recover. You might be able to just take maybe 4 or 5 days instead of a full 7 to 10. And so this is something you're going to have to play around with based upon your ability. Now, something else that I did wrong in Colorado is I didn't choose my meet openers very well. I used to choose my meet openers. I would take a heavy single in training, but a single that I felt like, well, I did it pretty fast. I didn't have to grind it out. It was a smooth single. And that is what I was using as my opener. This is not a good way to do it. Instead, whatever you do for your 2 sets of 3 on squat, bench, and deadlift in this 1 week out from competition, use that 3 rep max as your opener. Anything that you hit for 3 reps in training, as long as they're clean reps, you know for certain that you can crush as your opener. And that's what an opener should look like. Likewise, when you go from that opener, let's say, for example, you open with 300 pounds on the squat because you did 2 sets of 3 with 300 this week. Let's say you did your 4x3 with 285 this week and you did your 2x3 with 300 this week. That would mean this is your opener. Now, once you start with this, you're probably only going to want to jump maybe, if it goes real well, maybe to 320, maybe 325 for your, this is your opener, this is your second attempt. You still want to crush your second attempt. When you go to a powerlifting meet, you should be going 8 for 9, 9 for 9. You should be making all of your lifts. You don't want to go in there and go 5 for 9. You're not going to achieve a good total that way. So crush your opener, crush your second. Really, there shouldn't be any sticking points. You should not be grinding out your second. Depending on how this goes, then make a moderate jump. About half of the jump here. So if we jumped, 25 pounds, maybe you jump another 10 to 15, depending on how this goes, and you end up with 335 or 340. And that's your final lift for the meet. If you make that 340 lift, don't start with that as your opener the next meet that you go to. You might bomb out. Maybe that was a great day for you. When you start your next meet, after another couple blocks of training cycles, maybe just go in with 310, because 310 is probably going to be your new 3 rep max that you do in that training cycle. You're not going to have a triple of 340 unless you're genetically gifted and you're just going by leaps and bounds. Use this set of 3 to determine your meet opener. Make a 15 to 25 pound jump, 10 to 7.5 to maybe 12.5 kilos, and then do maybe half of what that jump was on your next jump to your third. This is what you should do for all 3 of your lifts. And it's going to establish a pattern of success. You're going to crush your opener, you're going to smoke your second, and then you're going to go for maybe a PR or a really heavy single close to a training PR on your third. And if you go 9 for 9 and you have heavy numbers like that, that's going to build up a massive total. Success breeds success. So don't open with 335 because you did a rep of 340 somewhere back in the training cycle. You had a great day, everything was perfect, and you're like, oh, I just opened with 335. What if at 335 you kind of have to grind out, or you have misgroove it or something like that? There's no way you're going to come back from that and hit your 340. But if you make smaller jumps and build up into that third, you can really establish a good total. So that's the advice that I have for you in peaking for powerlifting. Remember to have an overreaching phase. Remember to drop your training volume, but still keep the intensity high. And then deload as much as you need to so that you can feel fully prepared to bring your level of fitness to bear on the platform. When you make your attempts, set your openers as what you did for 3 reps, 2 sets of 3 reps in training, and then make a 10 to 20 pound jump depending on your strength level, and then make another 10-pound jump after that. Hope that helps. Hope that clarifies what peaking for powerlifting looks like. Thanks for the opportunity, Brandon. I appreciate it. Blessings.